When Konami first unveiled Silent Hill F, I immediately thought, I am buying this, no matter what. I never looked at any promotion footage and went out of my way to not know anything about the game prior to booting it up for the first time. Having just finished it, I question if that was a good idea. In case you were wondering, this is a very negative review. I dislike almost every single aspect of Silent Hill F immensely. However, I do not think that Silent Hill F is a bad game in and of itself. Actually, I think it's a pretty great game. Most of my animosity towards it stems from it being called Silent Hill, which you might think is silly, and I could even agree, but it does influence things. If it didn't, Konami would not have named it so. Something I've seen online a lot these past few weeks are people arguing whether the game is quote-unquote worthy of being a Silent Hill game or not, based on several different criteria. And I wanted to get out of my chest that, personally, I think the game does more to wear the skin of a Silent Hill franchise than a lot of people are willing to give it credit for, which is a bit unfortunate. There are tons of parallels and aspects of the game that give it a well-deserved place in the lineage, but it also does so much to set itself apart that it feels at least a bit contentious to have it alongside the other games, for better or worse. But then again, it also does at least a couple of things that make that inclusion feel entirely unwarranted and absurd. We will get into that in a minute or two. I also want to make it clear that my overall opinion on the Silent Hill franchise is not particularly high. Silent Hill 2 happens to be one of my favorite games of all time, and I thought that, despite some issues, the remake from last year did it justice. But on the whole, I don't have a high opinion of the series, although I am familiar with it, having played most of its titles. Just in case you have no idea, Silent Hill F is about a girl called Hinako who finds herself going down the mountain path to find her hometown of Ebisugaoka deserted for the most part. She manages to reunite with her friends, but things go from eerie to fucked as one of them gets bloomed and a weird fog accompanied by a swarm of spider lilies takes over the town. It's now up to Hinako to do something. A small disclaimer which I feel is warranted. I've played this game on PC, and as my dislike for some of its choices became apparent, some mods were employed. This is why you may find that Hinako looks different on some of the footage that I'm using, or why sometimes there is no overlay when I'm low on health or using focus. So let's get going. Here's the deal with Silent Hill F. The good. First of all, I really want to praise some of the things the game has done immensely well in my opinion. The atmosphere is excellent. Although the character models are very into the uncanny valley, the environments look phenomenal. Exploring the town is my favorite part of the game. The fog is realized incredibly well, and the lighting is used to great effect to highlight important features of the landscape. A somewhat unfortunate artifact of it being such a highly detailed game is that finding items is a bit awkward. Some of the environments are quite cluttered, and as someone who likes to play these games with the brightness set a little bit lower than normal, being able to spot items before I'm rubbing Hinako against them was just not common. But then again, rubbing against the wall and pressing X has always been a staple of the genre. It's a bit of a shame because the environments are so well realized, but I have to be pointing my camera down a lot more than I would like to, otherwise I'd miss half the items. Hinako does do a head turn towards the items whenever she gets in range, but the radius on it seems to be incredibly small, and since you're also moving the camera all the time, it's very difficult to spot when she's doing this very subtle head motion. Monsters are overall pretty good. Their movements and animations are amazing and very well executed. The designs are alright, they are creepy enough. I don't find any of them particularly disturbing though, but they do serve the purpose. Something that annoys me a bit is that the designs are a bit on the nose, but it's not like Nurse with Big Tits or Mannequin with 2 vaginas and no head were particularly clever symbolism for man is horny. One particular enemy that gave me a chuckle was one who attacks by jumping on top of Hinako and licking her face, amongst other attack patterns. It's equally obvious, but she mentions in her journal that these enemies don't seem to care about men and only chase women, which is not something that is ever shown in the game. I'm not sure where Hinako is taking that information from. There is, however, one enemy I want to talk about, because I do find it very effective at first, but it comes a little bit later in the game, so I'm dropping a sort of mid-game spoiler warning for the rest of this section. So there is this enemy, the thing which is a pregnant monster. This one is pretty creepy and shocking, and it's effective, and fighting it would have been an extremely memorable moment in the game had it been used one time when it is revealed as a boss encounter. However, they do bring it back as a regular enemy, and it's not even that much later. and it's always a horrible pain in the ass to fight it. On top of that, it is also one of the enemies that you actually do have to fight, as it often blocks your path forward and forces you into an arena when it shows up. It quickly goes from being a loathsome enemy to just an annoying encounter. The feeling of, oh, ew, what the fuck, no, that's awful, is quickly replaced by, oh, another one of these. And then there is the journal. I've seen some people complain about it for one reason or another, but I have to say, the journal is probably my favorite aspect of the entire game. I like it a lot. I dig the aesthetic, the way it updates, what it says and how it keeps track of things. It's an interface that brings me joy to interact with, and that's not an easy thing to say of video games in 2025. I love reading the entries and seeing them update and noticing the differences in tone from one entry to the next as the game progresses. How the pages change to reflect what's going on in the story. There is a lot of stuff about the journal to like as I see it. I have a slight pet peeve with the map, in the sense that Hinako was not taught proper Silent Hill map methodology and uses crosses everywhere, instead of signaling blocked paths with the good old trusty squiggly red line, which she uses only for doors. This is only tangentially related. I've seen people praise the fact that the game will move objects out of or in the way to block or unblock paths, and that was seen as a creepy thing by some people. I hate that and find it kinda lazy. Once a path is marked as blocked, it should remain blocked, and we find another way around it, another way through. I know and understand that some people see the moving object thing as creepy. I personally was intrigued when I first noticed that the car blocking the way in the beginning had been moved later on, but I also find it interesting when we need to look for alternate paths. It's just more exploration of the town, which is, for me, is the highlight of the game, instead of just this path that was blocked is now accessible, which to me feels a little bit cheap and unwarranted. And if that was the good, we now have to talk about the bad. And there are two things I want to talk about here, and both of these absolutely break me. The bad. The music. I tried to make allowances for it, and what exists of it is alright, but it's almost a non-existing entity in the game. So much time is spent in almost absolute silence. The sound design is great, don't get me wrong, there are some ambient sounds and those are wonderful. The swings and hits of weapons are all amazing. The game packs quite a sonorous punch, where effects are regarded, but the music is just not there. At first I thought the problem was mixing, but even after setting dynamic range to low and changing my speaker configurations and playing with headphones and all the jazz, all I got was ambient noises and silence for the vast majority of the game. Aside from a few tunes the game does sprinkle at key moments in the plot, what little music there is seems to be content with just existing in the background, which is a shame. Yamaoka's work on previous titles in the series had always been a highlight for being incredibly musical and melodic, despite the horror context. This is not it. While I'm talking about my disappointments in the audio department, I missed the radio. What happens here instead is that the battle music will swell in and out with monster proximity. The effect is generally the same, in that you have a sound cue for when enemies are approaching. But the radio was itself an aesthetic choice and part of the series' identity to me. It added a hint of surrealism to the game in a unique way. The music is not diegetic, as far as I can tell. It's not like Hinako is walking around and she suddenly hears chanting when monsters are close by, which would have been enough of an explanation to turn this paragraph around, by the way. So when the music comes and goes, it takes me out of the atmosphere of the game instantly. Since I'm being nostalgic and nitpicky, I also miss the flashlight. We do get a lantern at some points, but it doesn't really last long, and for most of the time when we have it, we are out in the open, so the lantern doesn't feel effective or useful. Anyway, the story. I have very mixed feelings about it, and this is going to be a very complex topic to unpack, but I lean very negatively on it overall for a variety of reasons. Most of all, I feel that the story is told in an extremely ineffective way, which compounds in annoyance by also being disrespectful of the player's time. In case you don't know, Silent Hill F adds new cutscenes and sections with New Game Plus and New Game Plus Plus. Full disclosure, I've not gotten into Plus Plus yet, but I have put a very solid amount of hours into the game, and what I've seen of the extra stuff that happens later absolutely does not justify the expected effort to see it. Or perhaps a better way to phrase it is that there was absolutely a way to structure this plot in a way to tell a complete story in one run. which makes the first run feel truncated on purpose, and it almost feels malicious. It feels like padding and something that exists only to inflate playtime. These are not different endings you get for fun or to get a different perspective on a complete story. This is a story that is incomplete unless you play the entire game 3 times, each time adding more info into the plot. I have seen some people compare it to Nier Automata. This is not like that. Nier Automata is a game that fakes you into believing the game is over, and then it continues to expand on a current story. Many times during the New Game Plus run that I'm currently on, the difference is this cutscene is now 1 second longer. It is not trivial, but it doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel good to experience this new content, because it doesn't feel like new content. It feels like content that was being withheld from me for no reason. This may sound like an interesting idea, but it's not something I find acceptable for a game that is as combat heavy as this is. More on that later. Moreover, something that really rubbed me the wrong way was that the story seems fairly devoid of nuance, and it's not really posing any interesting questions either. I'm sure there are layers to it that I'm missing, but it doesn't feel particularly insightful. The first ending you get, which I believe is mandatory, it's the only ending you can get, just sort of comes, and then it ends. What felt particularly weird to me was that for the first half of the game, it felt like it had basically no plot whatsoever. Then in the second half, it started just throwing random bits of information that don't seem to connect. What really bugged me is that by the end of the game, I didn't feel like I had learned anything. I didn't really understand what the game was trying to say or gain any sort of new perspective. I was just sort of confused and wondering what I had just witnessed. On a more personal note about the plot, and something I talked about with a few friends, and we've all got somewhat the same impression on, is that the game is trying to put forth a message of how men mistreat women and how unfair that is, but absolutely all the women in the game go out of their way to treat the protagonist like crap. Every single one. And considering what happens in the ending, the protagonist is not particularly exempt from this role. There is not a single positive portrayal of a woman anywhere in this game as far as I can see. It feels super shallow. On a perhaps less contentious note about the plot and pacing, I really dislike how aimless the game feels. There are moment-to-moment goals of reach X location or the good old find 3 objects, but there is no real overarching objective. I have no idea what I'm supposed to do or why I should be doing it at any point. There is no sense of drive from the protagonist whatsoever. Harry wanted to find his daughter, James wanted to find his wife, Henry wanted to escape room 302. Even Murphy had a perfectly clear escape the police go at the start of Silent Hill Downpour. For the vast majority of F, Hinako's goal seems to simply be to survive, which is not as compelling as one might imagine it to be. One side effect of this lack of direction is that we are always just arriving at a place, a cutscene place, and we are swiftly told to head out and go somewhere else. There is nothing to be done anywhere. We arrive and immediately leave. The town feels incredibly underutilized due to this. It is kind of wild to think that there are only ever 2 dungeons in the town, the school and the house. The house is great, no complaints there. And the school is also great, but it's over in like 10 minutes. Since the other world is an entirely separate thing, what could have been an amazing section of the game is cut short to essentially 2 hallways and a handful of rooms that mostly look super similar. Don't get me wrong, the school is still one of the game's highlights, but it is so despite everything that works against it. Actually, for as good as the environmental design is, the locations in the game are extremely samey looking. This may come down to realism, but it doesn't help. A lot of the things this game does are a far cry from anything resembling realism. More on this later. So I feel like it is warranted to say that a less accurate approach to level design could have been beneficial. On the topic of level design, I cannot overstate how much I hate the way the Otherworld was handled in this game. The Dark Shrine is an incredibly bland location, and my animosity towards it increases tenfold when I remember that pretty much all of the game's dumbest shit takes place within it. There are moments in the game where things do come together, but these instances are few and far between. Even when it works, the place just can't be disassociated with its flaws. It feels like a massive drawback to the entire structure of the game to have the other world behave in this extremely isolated manner with no direct connection to the town at all. I'm sure the disconnect is intentional, but again, it doesn't help. What ends up happening is that the gameplay takes place in two entirely separate planes, and neither of them is better for it. The overlapping, the juxtaposition, the nature of the other world leaking into the real world was always a point of strength and identity for the Silent Hill franchise, and it's completely missing here. Speaking very personally, I also have a quote-unquote issue with the setting and the implications it brings in terms of thematic exploration and narrative. I don't think being set in Japan is doing the game any favors for me, again, personally. And one more time, I do understand this to be a very personal and contentious take. I'm not trying to change anybody's mind on this, but I am going to elaborate on why I feel this way, so you can at least try, if you want to catch a glimpse of where I'm coming from and why I have this opinion. And if you would perhaps also find yourself in a similar headspace. My dislike comes from a feeling that the setting is acting as a barrier between me and the themes of the game. What I love about Silent Hill 2, for instance, were the weird sentences, the misplaced inflections, the sense that things were ever so slightly off, the way characters moved and how they expressed certain thoughts. There is a disconnect of a sort here. I do find the characters to express their thoughts in weird ways or say and do things that are senseless to me, but all of that can be justified by a single word: anime. It feels like an anime, or perhaps more aptly, it feels like a visual novel, of which the writer takes his fame from. At least a couple of the scenes and pieces of text come to mind where characters openly state their entire frame of mind accurately and without any sort of filter or nuance. It feels completely out of place in what is supposed to be a Silent Hill game. There is a part later on where Hinako is made to walk a winding path, and she literally states how it resembles her mind. I could just not help but laugh and think, wow, thanks for pointing that out to me. I might have missed that one. In another context, these disconnects might have made me engage with the game, but since they feel so out of place in this, but so justified in an ambient that is tangential, it creates this sort of weird separation. Previous games in the series made me engage intellectually with them at a level that I simply cannot in this instance. And part of that is that I simply lack the required cultural background to contextualize all the folklore, but I also have enough media literacy background to spot tropes it's leaning on super heavily, and I just find it kinda tiresome. Another aspect of this is that my Japanese is not fluent enough to get the shape of sentences as being something awkward if they are, but it's good enough to get some inferences and to be like, is that relevant? I don't know, which is more frustrating than it is engaging. In another scene, when two characters are speaking to each other about the protagonist, and they say something really extremely aggravatingly annoying, and the protagonist is just there and being like, hey, what's up? And I'm furiously at the screen, are you seriously not going to question what they just said about you? What the fuck? This is exhausting. Silent Hill has always had at its core a sense of deconstruction of American culture. I play this game and I think of two other series entirely, Fatal Frame and Siren. As a series, as an entity with its own aesthetic sense and identity, Silent Hill never once crossed my mind. And personally, I find that regrettable. Not exactly inherently related to the shifting setting, but something else that F does that I find it to be undesirable is the excessive focus around the mysticism and religious workings. It is as tiresome here as it was in Silent Hill 1 and 3. 4 had this aspect too, but it handled it better, which is probably the first time I've ever praised Silent Hill 4. This game is trying to tell a human story, but it is completely drenched in dull mystical shit. You could see it as being very metaphorical work, and I don't find that to be incorrect, but I do find it to be a very generous read of a very poorly written story. There is only so much symbolism you can use before you are simply trying to obfuscate a story for no reason, and Silent Hill F crosses that line about 6 times over. It is all metaphorical, is a very delicate step away from it was all a dream, which most people would agree is probably the most disappointing conclusion you can have to almost any story. It's all well and good to have some inexplicable and crazy things in your horror game, but if you want to tell a human story about a girl being torn on growing up and accepting her role in a patriarchal society, or staying true to her independence and breaking free from gender norms, that story might actually be a lot more interesting if it isn't told by 7 layers of allegories about foxes and birds and magical spells and occult rituals, because the story of the girl wanting to break free is is interesting. Ridiculous religious bullshit is kinda not, but the game is absolutely enamored with the lore it has created for itself, and it cannot stop rubbing it in my face, purely to its own detriment. Whenever I'm about to be engaged in the game, a dude with ceremonial attire and black painted nails and flowing silver hair swoops in and saves the day by casting a magical spell, and I'm just completely out of the game. I can see someone looking at this entire thing and being like, that's what's so cool about it, and more power to you. I fucking hate it. I find it poorly executed to an almost hilarious degree. It's to the point of being goofy, which I guess leads me to my next point. The ugly. I am very torn on how to handle this part of the video, because I can appreciate people not wanting to be spoiled on things. I also think the game does something inexcusable in its later half, and I need to address it. It would feel disingenuous for me not to, because had I known this was in the game, I might have chosen not to get it at all. I won't dwell on it from a narrative position, but I want to talk about it mechanically. This is your last warning. Brace yourself. Konami, what the fuck is this bullshit? Be real with me here. Prior to this game coming out, if I had told you that in this Silent Hill title, midway through, the protagonist finds themselves in the possession of a giant animal arm and the ability to trigger a berserk mode to unleash uninterruptible attack on hordes of enemies, would you have believed me? There is a health gauge, a stamina gauge, a sanity meter, there is a dodge, a perfect dodge, a counter, a charged attack that consumes sanity, a special mode that you can trigger once your CO gauge is full. There is a weapon-specific charge attack and counter attacks. There are inescapable enemy grabs, force fights with enemies that keep resurrecting if you don't kill them in a specific way. There are several items that give you what sound like super interesting and specific combat boosts and benefits, like your stamina not draining. But you have a severely limited inventory space and a need to offer items for upgrade points, which completely nullifies the potential utility. There are so many systems, and I'm left wondering if any of the developers have ever played any of the classic Silent Hill games and understood why people liked those. Or maybe this is merely a marketing ploy and the people who worked on this are as upset to have their game chastised for being a poor attempt at something it was never meant to be as I am to have played it under that guise. Because the real killer here is that the combat is actually pretty good. I like it. The systems are interesting. Some of the concepts the game is working with in terms of gameplay design are very novel. I really like that the gameplay changes from New Game to New Game Plus, not only due to the carryover equipment, but because the way you deal with inventory management changes entirely. It's all pretty interesting stuff. I just don't wish these systems to be anywhere near a game that's called Silent Hill. This is not what I signed up for, and it ruins the experience for me. When I'm trying to engage with the plot and explore the environment, all these elements just come across as annoying. And speaking of annoyance, weapons break, which is always super fun, so no one on this earth ever. While the game does give you a good amount of weapons to work with, and further in there are ways to mitigate weapon degradation via the equipment system, which this game also has. These are all workarounds to a problem that didn't need to exist. I'd rather be given each weapon type once and have them not break. Weapon durability was a bad idea in Silent Hill 4. People seem to forget that this game had that as well. It was bad in Oranges, it was bad in Downpour, was bad in any game that ever had this mechanic, and surprise to no one, it is bad here. Overall, the combat is extremely involved, in a way that feels both disruptive to the flow of the game and unnecessary to the franchise. But the real killer is that it really falls apart on boss fights and when you are forced to deal with multiple enemies, which seems to happen more and more often as the game goes on, and especially so on higher difficulties. It's not great. The combat system also has a few quirks that I've found very off-putting having to work around. Hinako's dodge is very lengthy in distance. It puts her quite far from the origin point, which may sound great, but it's a bit too much. If the enemies didn't chase after you, often the next attack out of a dodge won't connect at all unless you dash a second time into the enemy. By the time you're done with this dance, you have no stamina left. It's super clunky. Unless it was a perfect dodge, in which she will magnetize towards the enemy and the counter will land. But if you just wanted to run, she magnetizes anyway and you get punished for playing well. There are several ways to play though. I started out completely neglecting focus and light attacks, and I've since started started to incorporate those a lot more. I use focus on basically every fight now, and normal attacks have surely earned a place in my repertoire. I've learned to enjoy the combat in the game, to a pretty high degree actually, but that doesn't make it appropriate. I did not sign up for this stamina management intense melee combat game when I purchased something called Silent Hill, and especially not when I made a very direct choice of playing it on a mode called Story. This is not a complaint about the game being too hard, it's a complaint about the game being obtrusive and unfun. Combat has never been a highlight of Silent Hill games, but at least earlier titles had the decency to not focus on it. As good as the combat in F may be, it is still entirely out of place, and I really wish it had provided an actual story mode for people who don't want to be bothered with it, because what we currently have ain't it. Even in story mode, basic enemies can stun lock me for about 3/4 of my health. One of the few times I died was when I was walking through the fields and an enemy just grabbed me from off screen and killed me outright. I wasn't scared, but I was very annoyed. For anyone wanting to defend these systems in the context of a Silent Hill title, I would love to hear your opinion on Silent Hill Homecoming and Silent Hill Downpour. And yet, even with all of these systems, you know what this game doesn't have? The final ground attack. It feels so weird that all of these interwoven systems would be in place, but a staple of the series has been left out. It was always the most satisfying and iconic part of the combat too. Also a bit weird that very early on, Hinako does go to town on a dead enemy, but we are never allowed to do the same on our own. They either die and quickly disappear, or they stay in the ground invulnerable and the only way you can deal with it is using your mystical powers, or they will get back up. It's a pity. And well, at least the good old steel pipe made it. It's always fun to see Hinako holding strong to the steel pipe in every cutscene. And the way in which it transitions to whatever weapon you may actually be holding during gameplay is actually quite smooth and often feels clever. I look at what Silent Hill has brought us since its introduction, and this is a series that has been on a linear path towards a more action-focused experience all the way back to Silent Hill 3. Even the glorious work of Team Silent was already treading on this ground. I've seen people do amazing mental gymnastics to try and avoid the Dark Souls comparisons, and to me, that just sounds like absolutely willful ignorance. But it's also really hard to deny that a lot of these contentious decisions and traits exhibited by F can be traced back to earlier games in the series. The precedent is there. This is not the Silent Hill that I loved, and it's not the Silent Hill that I want, but maybe this is what it is going to be from now on. And maybe in time I can come to accept that, but that day is not today. And so I exist in a very awkward position with Silent Hill F, because I hate it. Silent Hill F fucking sucks and I hate it. It is a terrible Silent Hill game and it makes me angry. But the game is also pretty excellent and I do enjoy playing it. But I find myself constantly disappointed and frustrated by it. But I like to engage with it mechanically. But it makes me legit upset, because this is not what I want from Silent Hill and I feel manipulated. The main takeaway here is that anything positive I have to say about the game needs to be divorced from the notion of it being a Silent Hill game, or it all comes crashing down. On its own, it is a fantastic game, with some odd choices that I'll gladly look the other way in favor of it being a fun game to play, while also boosting some incredible atmosphere and environmental design. But I would advise anyone wanting to play a Silent Hill game to stay the hell away from it. This ain't it. You got me, Konami. You named the thing Silent Hill and I bought it sight unseen. I fell for it. This one is on me. So, post New Game Plus addendum. This is the second time I've gotten back into this script and had to add something to it, but it will be the last, because I finished New Game Plus now. I enjoyed the game, I want to keep playing it, I think it's pretty good, but I also don't feel like the plot has anywhere interesting to go, and I wanted to see what was up. So I asked a friend to recommend to me a video with all of the endings so we could continue debating the game. And wow, but like wow, what the fuck? Anyone saying the extra endings are required viewing to truly appreciate the story are running on some powerful sunken cost fallacy. If anything, each succeeding ending made me enjoy the plot a lot less. It really did sour the game for me. This is a fucking mess narrative-wise. The characters are so impossibly unlikable. I'm not even sure I have much to add, in the sense that nothing I've seen in these extra endings made me gain any any new perspective or appreciation for anything. They double down on the aspects of the game that I dislike the most and turn the mixed reception into a negative one. I don't actually want to spoil the endings or debate them at length. This video is not an analysis of the plot and its themes. It's simply a review of the game and its place in the Silent Hill franchise. And yeah, I'm not happy. This is tropey as shit, and it's not saying anything particularly involved or nuanced either. The writer seems averse to the notion that growing up might actually be a good thing, and due to that, his characters conflate maturity with unhappiness. As I said to a friend, this arrested development fetishization bullshit is toxic and tired as shit. There is so much I could be complaining about. I haven't even mentioned Wrinkle once. Don't get me started on that fucking